There's a version of me that used to lie awake at 2 a.m. running through a conversation I had 6 years ago. Not a traumatic one, not even a significant one, just some throwaway comment I made at a party that probably nobody remembered 10 minutes later. And I'd be there in the dark, reconstructing every possible interpretation of how it landed, every facial expression, every pause. Trying to figure out if I'd said something wrong, if the person liked me less after, if I should have said something different, for hours, over nothing. And the worst part wasn't the sleeplessness. The worst part was knowing completely and clearly that this was irrational and not being able to stop anyway. That's the thing nobody talks about when they talk about overthinking. They treat it like a logic problem, like you just need to learn the right framework or breathe the right way or write in a journal more and then your brain will finally just calm down. But if you're the kind of person who overthinks, you've already thought about all of that. You've already analyzed why you overthink. You've already built a mental model of your own overthinking. You've overthought your overthinking, and somehow that made it worse. So I'm not here to give you a list of tips. I'm not going to tell you to meditate or go for walks or practice gratitude, not because those things are wrong, but because if tips were the answer, you wouldn't be here right now. You're here because something in the way your mind works feels like it's working against you, and you want someone to actually talk about what that's like. So let's do that. Let me tell you something that took me way too long to figure out. Overthinking isn't a thinking problem. It's a feeling problem that disguised itself as thinking. Stay with me for a second. When your brain starts spiraling, replaying conversations, catastrophizing outcomes, generating 17 different interpretations of a text message that says okay, it feels like your brain is working too hard, like the engine's running too fast. And so the natural instinct is to try to think your way to the answer, reach a conclusion, resolve the loop, get certainty. But that's exactly where people get trapped. Because the loop doesn't exist because you haven't found the answer yet, the loop exists because some part of you is scared, anxious, uncertain, and thinking is what you do with that feeling, not to solve it, to avoid sitting inside it. Every spiral, every mental simulation, every worst-case scenario you've ever run, that wasn't analysis. That was your brain trying to outrun a feeling it couldn't handle being still with. And here's where things get a little uncomfortable. This worked for a while, not perfectly but well enough. Keeping your mind busy kept you from having to feel the thing underneath the busyness. The anxiety about whether people actually like you, the fear that you're falling behind, the quiet, low-grade dread that you might make the wrong choice and ruin something important. Thinking at full speed was a coping mechanism, a really convincing one. The problem is that coping mechanisms don't solve the problem, they manage it. And after years of managing it, the mechanism becomes the problem. I want to describe something, and I want you to notice if this sounds familiar. You've got a decision to make, doesn't matter what it is. Could be something big like a career move or something genuinely small like which response to send in a group chat. Your brain immediately starts generating options, pros and cons, possible reactions, downstream consequences. You look things up, you ask for opinion, you start 3 different notes, apps, documents that you never finish. You go to sleep thinking about it and wake up thinking about it. Weeks pass, you haven't decided. And at some point, the decision kind of just makes itself. Either time runs out or you pick the path of least resistance, and you feel this strange mix of relief and shame. Relief that it's over. Shame that you couldn't just choose. And people around you don't fully get it. They think you're being indecisive, dramatic, overly cautious. What they don't see is that inside your head you were working incredibly hard the entire time. You weren't avoiding the decision. You were trying to make it perfectly because some part of you believes that if you just think hard enough you can find the option that has no downsides. The path that can't hurt you. The answer that everyone approves of. You were trying to think your way to safety. And if that's you, I want you to know something. That's not a character flaw. That's not weakness. That's actually the sign of a brain that cares deeply and feels things intensely and has probably been burned enough times that it learned, slow down, think more, be sure before you move. Somewhere along the way, caution became the only thing that felt safe. But we'll get to why that's also a trap in a minute. Here's something the internet doesn't talk about honestly enough. We live in an environment that is basically a machine designed to manufacture overthinking. I'm not being dramatic. Think about what a single average day does to your brain. You wake up and within about 90 seconds you're reading opinions, hot takes, breaking news, comment sections full of people who are very certain about very complicated things. You're scrolling through people's curated lives and making unconscious comparisons. You're seeing decisions other people made, the jobs they took, the places they moved, the relationships they're in, and whether you mean to or not, you're measuring your own life against that backdrop. Then there's the notifications, the small dopamine pings that your brain starts chasing without you even noticing. You open your phone not because something happened, but because you're habituated to checking. You're not looking for anything specific, you just need to know, and if nothing's there, you refresh, because maybe something will be there in 5 seconds that wasn't there 5 seconds ago. This is what your brain is marinating in all day: uncertainty, comparison, incomplete information. The sense that decisions are high stakes and highly visible. Of course it's overthinking, of course it's spinning out. It's been fed a steady diet of reasons to be vigilant. The environment selects for anxiety, and then the culture turns around and sells you a solution to the anxiety the environment created. Apps to track your habits, courses on productivity, podcasts about mindset. A whole industry built on the premise that you're broken in some specific way that requires a specific product to fix. And I say that as someone making a video on this exact topic, so make of that what you will. But here's the honest version: you are not broken. You are a normal human nervous system responding to an abnormal amount of inputs. The fact that your brain is working overtime isn't a malfunction, it's actually kind of the expected result. That's not an excuse to stay stuck, but it's an important thing to understand before we talk about anything else. Because if you start from the premise that something is wrong with you, every strategy you try becomes another way to fix the broken thing. And that framing keeps you in a constant low-level war with yourself that is exhausting and ultimately counterproductive. So let's talk about what actually happens inside an overthinking spiral, because once you see the mechanism, something shifts. It usually starts with a trigger, something uncertain, ambiguous, or emotionally loaded. A conversation that didn't quite land right, a decision with no obviously correct answer, a future scenario with unknown outcomes. Your brain registers the uncertainty, and that registers as threat. Not a conscious threat, not something you're explicitly afraid of, just a signal. Low-level diffuse, something is unresolved. Then the thinking starts, and the thinking feels productive at first. You're analyzing, considering, planning. Your brain is doing the thing it's good at. But what's actually happening underneath is that the thinking is serving the anxiety, not the problem. You're not moving toward a solution. You're moving toward a feeling of control, or the illusion of it. Here's the part that's a little weird. The more you think, the more variables you generate. The more variables you generate, the more uncertain things feel. The more uncertain things feel, the more your brain doubles down on thinking. It's a loop. And the loop doesn't have a natural exit. You can't think your way to certainty because certainty doesn't exist. Not about the future, not about other people. Not about whether you made the right call 5 years ago, or whether that email was worded slightly wrong, or whether the life you're living is the one you were supposed to be living. Certainty is the drug, overthinking is the addiction. And just like any addiction, the thing you keep going back to for relief is also the thing making it worse. That's not me being poetic, that's literally the mechanism. The relief you get from thinking, the momentary sense that you almost have a grip on it, is what keeps the loop running. You don't keep spiraling because it's working, you keep spiraling because stopping feels worse. And this is where I need to say something that might land differently depending on where you are right now. The answer isn't to think better, the answer is to get better at tolerating not knowing. I know, not what you were hopping for. You wanted a technique, a framework, a specific thing to do when the spiral starts, and we'll get there. But the foundation is this: as long as your nervous system treats uncertainty as an emergency, no technique will hold for long. You'll use a breathing exercise and then immediately return to the loop. You'll write in a journal and then turn the journaling into another way to analyze the problem. You'll go for a walk and spend the entire walk running mental simulations. The real work is quieter than all of that. It's learning to sit inside uncertainty without your brain declaring a 5-alarm crisis. That sounds abstract, so let me make it concrete. The next time you notice the spiral starting, and you will notice it because you're already good at observing your own thinking, that's kind of the thing we're working with here. I want you to try something different. Instead of trying to interrupt the thought, I want you to drop one level down and ask, what am I feeling right now underneath this? Not what am I thinking, what am I feeling? Because usually, right there under the spiral, there's something pretty simple. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being wrong, fear of being forgotten. Something tender and human and not remotely complicated. And here's the thing about feelings. Unlike thoughts, they actually respond to acknowledgement. If you sit with the fear instead of running from it into more thinking, something interesting happens. It doesn't immediately disappear, but it does stop feeling like an emergency. It settles a little, not because you solved it, because you looked at it. That's the actual mechanism of relief that overthinking is trying to manufacture. You just have to go get it from the source. Now let's talk about decisions specifically, because that's where this gets the most painful for most people. There's a belief that runs underneath most overthinking about decisions. The belief is, there is a right answer and my job is to find it, and if I don't find it, the consequences will be significant and possibly permanent. That belief is doing enormous damage. Because here's what's actually true: most decisions don't have a right answer. They have different answers, each with their own trade-offs, each leading to different versions of your life, each with their own gifts and costs. The job isn't to find the one correct path. The job is to choose and then make that choice meaningful through what you do afterward. I know that sounds like something someone says on a poster, but think about the decisions that have actually mattered in your life. Almost none of them were right at the time of making them. They became right or they didn't based on what you did after. The relationship that worked out was good because you worked on it, not because you chose perfectly. The career that fulfilled you did so because you brought something to it. The decision itself was almost beside the point. The version of you that waits for certainty before moving is protecting you from a risk that mostly lives in your head. And meanwhile, the actual cost, which is time, presence, and energy spent in the waiting zone, is very real. There's a name for this in psychology: decision fatigue, analysis paralysis, but those names make it sound clinical. What it really feels like is being stuck in the doorway of your own life. You can see the room, you could step in, but some part of you keeps insisting you need a few more seconds to be sure. The reframe I want to offer you is this: choosing imperfectly and moving is not the risky option. That's actually the safe one, because on the other side of an imperfect decision is information, experience, adaptation, and the quiet confidence that you can handle what comes. On the other side of waiting for certainty is just more waiting, more spiraling, more of the exact feeling you were trying to escape. Done imperfectly beats perfect indefinitely, every single time. There's one more thing I want to say about the people around you, because this one is subtle and important. Overthinkers very often carry a quiet belief that they are being watched more closely than they are, that the things they say are being analyzed, that their choices are under scrutiny. That when something goes wrong or feels awkward or comes out wrong, people are filing it away somewhere, building a case. And this is worth examining because it's usually not accurate, but it's also not random. It usually comes from somewhere. Sometimes it's from a childhood environment where you were actually watched closely, where small mistakes did have consequences, where earning approval was genuinely necessary. Your nervous system learned, pay attention, stay careful, don't slip up, and it's never quite gotten the update that the environment has changed. That most people are too busy thinking about their own stuff to be analyzing yours. The social anxiety that fuels overthinking is often a solution to a problem you don't have anymore. That's not a criticism, that's just a thing worth knowing, because once you see it, once you can trace the hypervigilance back to where it came from, it stops feeling like a character trait. It starts feeling like a habit, and habits can change, maybe not quickly, maybe not completely, but they can loosen. So who are we, the people sitting through this video? We're not people who don't care. That's actually the whole thing, isn't it? We overthink because we care how things land, we care how people feel, we care about making good choices. We care about the future in a way that makes it feel very loud in our heads. That's not a flaw, that depth is actually one of the most valuable things about us. The issue isn't that we feel too much. The issue is that we've been routing all of that feeling through analysis instead of through presence. Instead of actually being in the experience, we've been thinking about the experience, planning it, reviewing it, preparing for the next version of it. And the irony is that the very richness of being alive, the texture and the warmth and the strange beauty of just existing in an ordinary moment, keeps slipping by while we're busy running simulations of it. There's a particular kind of person who finds this video, not because an algorithm served it to them. Well, the algorithm did, but they clicked because something in the description or the title felt like it was describing them specifically. They know what it's like to feel both very perceptive and very exhausted by that perception. They know what it's like to have a rich inner life and also wish that inner life would occasionally just shut up for 10 minutes. They're curious about themselves, they're trying, they haven't given up the project of becoming someone who actually feels okay in their own head. That's not common. More people have quietly made peace with the noise than you'd think. The fact that you're still trying to understand it says something about the kind of person you are. And people like us, people who still notice, who still question, who still want the inside of their life to match the outside, we're worth something. To each other especially, because the alternative is just drifting, going numb, accepting the static as the signal. We're not doing that. Let me give you something practical to close with, and I want to say it in a way that actually lands instead of just sounds smart. The most useful thing I've ever found for the spiral, not to eliminate it but to work with it, is giving your brain a job with a deadline and a finish line. Here's what I mean. When the spiral starts, your brain is in search mode. It's looking for certainty, and because certainty doesn't exist, it'll search indefinitely. The way to interrupt that is not to tell yourself to stop thinking. That doesn't work. The way is to give the thinking a constraint. You get 5 minutes, set a timer if you have to. For 5 minutes you can think about this as hard as you want. Run every angle, consider every option, play out the worst case, get it all out, and when the timer ends you either make a decision or you put the question down and return to it at a specific later time. Not later, a specific time. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. you'll think about this again. And until then, when the thought comes up, you remind your brain we have a time for this. Not now. That sounds too simple. It isn't. What you're doing is teaching your nervous system that uncertainty has a container, that you're not in freefall, that there's a structure, and over time the container gets bigger. The window of okayness between now and the next time you address the problem gets longer. The anxiety loses a little of its grip. It doesn't fix everything, but it's a place to start. And alongside that, and this one's harder, practice making small decisions quickly and without second guessing. Not big ones, small ones, what to order, which route to take, what to say in a low-stakes message. Train yourself to choose, move, and let the choice be done. Not because those decisions don't matter, but because your brain needs reps of I chose, it was fine, I survived uncertainty, and nothing fell apart. That's the update your nervous system is waiting for. Evidence that imperfect choosing is survivable. Because it is, you know it is. You just need your nervous system to believe it. Here's where I'll leave you. The mind that overthinks and the mind that creates, notices, empathizes, and cares deeply, they're the same mind. You don't get to keep one and discard the other. What we're doing when we work on this isn't silencing the mind. It's teaching it that it doesn't have to be the last line of defense against every possible threat. It doesn't have to solve everything in advance. It doesn't have to be sure before it can move. You're allowed to step into the room before you know exactly how it goes. You're allowed to say the thing before you've analyzed every way it could land. You're allowed to exist in the middle of a decision without that middle being an emergency. And you're allowed to trust yourself a little more than you currently do, not blindly, not recklessly, just a little more. We're not on the other side of this, most of us. We're in the middle of figuring it out. And I think there's something actually valuable about that, about being honest that this is an ongoing process, not a destination. The people who have fixed their anxiety and now radiate calm certainty make for good thumbnails. But real life is messier than that. Real peace is something you practice, lose, come back to, practice again. You're already doing that. The fact that you're thinking about this, questioning it, trying to understand it, that's not the overthinking. That's something else. That's you refusing to just be on autopilot. That's you caring about what's happening inside your own head, and that matters more than I can probably put into words. So here's the one thing I'll ask you to sit with. What's one thing you've stopped doing, stopped overanalyzing, stopped waiting for permission to do? Stopped rehearsing into infinity, that finally let you actually live it instead of just plan it. Drop it below, because I think we could all use a reminder that moving forward is possible, that other people are doing it, that the loop can end or at least get quieter. If this felt like something, stick around. We're going to keep having these conversations. There's a lot more where this came from, and none of it is a list of tips.